Hi, Chris Lane from London Metropolitan University here. This is a video blog for the module Studying London. I'm going to talk about a block of flats at the bottom of my road, which used to have a beautiful little strip of grass, which the residents of the block of flats on the ground floor used to grow beans, runner beans, potatoes and other garden vegetables. It's as a result of the block of flats being knocked down because it was structurally unsound and there was planning permission to build new housing, has now been replaced by a rubbish tip, which is a bit sad. And I'm going to just tell you a little bit about the context for this development. If you have a look on Hackney Council's planning website, one of the really interesting revelations that you find there is that all new building is described in quite a lot of detail, the thinking behind it, the design ideas behind it, the presets for planning a new development. And one of the accounts that the document gives is that a car park that used to be at the back of the block of flats is no longer deemed to be needed, and actually gardens will be provided in its place. So I was quite interested to think about the fact that previously residents had used the garden to grow vegetables, to meet their needs for maybe supplying themselves with good food, good nutritious food, and that in the replacement development, which is going to include some social housing, there was also a plan to create gardens that perhaps might be better suited to growing vegetables than was the case with the previous gardening, which was really rather ad hoc. And I can see that in the planning document, one of the reasons why the need for a car park was deemed to be no longer necessary was that it's considered that there's good public transport in the area. And actually, I've mentioned in my previous lectures that certainly public transport is something that's the main method for people getting to work in the area, along with the bicycle. But I think we can also see that this is consistent with a wider policy of trying to reduce pollution, improve health, reduce carbon emissions as part of local government obligations to make an impact on improving the environment and reducing global warming. I did notice in the news the other day, however, that new car registrations have hit an all-time high, so I think that's quite interesting. There's lots of local action to improve the environment, but it seems as if some of the longer-term trends in terms of polluting behaviour are very persistent. Another interesting element that comes out of the design document, the planning office document on the Hackney website, is that the housing that will be built to replace the previous flats, there are going to be 7 housing units, are termed as 10-year blind. There's a 10-year blind approach to the building. And the idea here is that there's an identical look and design to the rented accommodation and the private accommodation. And I thought that was quite interesting because one of the interesting accounts that have grown up recently around the development of new housing in the inner city is that very often in mixed developments where there's a mix of social and private housing, there's often a very different approach to the entrance halls or the entrance arrangements for the different residents. And one of the ideas has been that, you know, on prestigious privately owned property, you'll have a big atrium and a foyer staffed by a security guard, and the social housing, which might actually look as if it's in the same development, has a kind of very unawe-inspiring back door. So the poorer residents, you could say, don't actually use the same entrance as the wealthier residents, and this is being represented as being highly socially divisive. So quite interesting that a different approach is being proposed in the new property that is being considered here. One of the other things that comes out as a result of the planning document is that although the current accommodation's being demolished, and obviously therefore the residents are no longer present, there is an intention that some of the original residents will move back in to the new property once it's built. So one of the things I was wondering about was whether the residents might, who were doing the gardening, might move back in, and I might see a recurrence of the beautiful allotment that they tended on the outside of their property. However, I thought it was interesting that in all of the discussion about the residents and about the new gardens that are going to be built, there wasn't really any reference to anybody using the garden to grow vegetables, and I thought that there was a bit of a disjuncture there between, on one hand, an agenda around environmentalism, and also lots of reference to the need to consult with residents. But actually the thing that I had noticed most, which was this creation of a space for growing vegetables, quite an unusual thing to see in the inner city, in the garden of public housing, didn't appear to be referenced at all. So I thought that was quite interesting. One of the other things that's happened, which I've mentioned previously, is that in the space around the building after the demolition has taken place, a huge amount of rubbish is built up, or recently built up, because people were just using it as a place to fly tip. And I think in a way, this is a little bit ironic. It seems as if between the housing department perhaps and the planners and the architects, a really precious piece of guerrilla gardening that had become part of the way I recognised and identified with my neighbourhood has been overlooked. And I think that, in a way, if that is the case, it's not all that surprising that that's occurred, given the complexities of trying to bring new public housing arrangements into place in the context of reduced funding. So, I don't know, we might conclude that those with responsibility for urban planning need to pay more attention to identifying what's unique and really unusual amongst existing residents and in existing developments, and really work hard to make sure that residents have, or where residents have appropriated unregulated space for productive purposes, they seek to protect those uses in new schemes. And just a kind of end note, in the last few days, the council has erected hoardings around the site with the kind of graphics that you see often on the hoardings around new sites of development. Often you'll see people drinking lattes in cafes as a way of promoting the benefits of a particular new residence. In this case, though, what the council have printed on their hoardings, and I'll just quote what they're saying, it says 4 new council houses for social renting, plus 3 for private sale to help pay for the works in the absence of government funding. And then there's quite a lot of other information to promote what the council are doing. So it says that the development is part of a borough-wide programme that's building more than 900 new council homes for social renting. That the development's justified because the former building was structurally unsound, and that the houses will have gardens, and that there are local employment and training opportunities that will result from this development. So quite interesting that the council's using the outside of the demolished site to say something about quite a contentious political question. Another interesting thing that's happened, which I think speaks something about my local community, although lots of rubbish had been fly tipped in the gap between the hoardings and the walls surrounding the property, very recently a notice has gone up that's very clearly drawn by children, which says, "We play near here, so please don't dump rubbish." And actually all the rubbish has now gone. I'm not sure how long that will last for, though. So that just ends my little account of my thoughts around a property at the end of my road, some of the links to research that I've done to try to understand what's taking place, and then a bit of a discussion about links to wider social questions and wider social problems, things to do with problems with the disposal of rubbish, the question of gentrification, and the link between new housing and the environment. So thanks for listening, and look out for my next blog post.